Our guest today is Joe Hours. Joe is the Director of AI Solutions at Centric Consulting, where he helps organizations move beyond AI experimentation into real-world deployment at scale. He works with clients across industries to identify high-impact use cases, implement AI solutions, and drive the organizational change needed to make adoption stick. And he's with us today to talk about why so many companies struggle to operationalize AI and what it really takes to move from experimentation to enterprise-wide impact. So, Joe, welcome to the program today. Look, researchers tell us that about two-thirds of companies indeed are experimenting with AI, but only a fraction have fully deployed it across the organization. Why is that? Why is there such a big gap between experimentation and execution?
Well, thanks for having me, Kevin. And that's a great opening question here. Uh, I like to point out that anybody can run a demo, and demos are great. Our attention spans are short. You get something crammed in, show something for 15 minutes in an hour-long meeting, and people are like all excited, right? Let's go and move this. But when you make that transition from what runs on somebody's laptop into what runs in production on a consistent, reliable basis, there's a huge chasm there that you have to traverse. And it's not a technological challenge here. Um, these these proof of concepts don't fail to scale or they don't fail to productionalize because there's a limitation or a lack of capability of the models. It really is that folks don't understand the nature of what they're trying to do when they move off that desktop into production. So, an example is when you're running a demo, you typically have cleaner data, you have limited use cases, you haven't really encountered the world, right? I think it was Eisenhower who said, plans are great until you meet the battlefield, right? Something along those lines. And the same is true of a demo. They work great in isolation, right? You've tested it, you've iterated over it multiple times, but then when you have the unknown come in and you don't know how to handle the unknown, that makes it very, very difficult to scale. The other side of the problem that folks typically don't take into account is what you're doing is fundamentally transforming knowledge work. And that's not a technology problem. That's an organizational problem, right? Most organizations are filled with knowledge workers. And within those knowledge workers, there's a large amount of institutionalized knowledge. We talk about this all the time. With change management people, org design folks, they always talk about the hidden knowledge that's within individuals. And extracting that, embedding that into agents is the hard part. The technology itself, that's the easy part. The models are commodities. The capabilities are near commodities across the frontier firms. So it's really about how do you extract that information, embed it in agents to encounter the big unknown. That's the chasm that you have to cross, is encountering that unknown. And that's why so many people fail, because they think it's just a technology problem. They think, you know what, I'm going to pick my favorite agent framework. I'm going to add some prompts in here. We'll add some additional connectors and data. We'll run through a process, demo it in a meeting, great, let's move to production. It's not that easy. And in fact, I think you sort of undersell how difficult this is. And so, two-thirds of organizations have AI initiatives, but only about 6% actually scale any significant agentic solution because they're not tackling the hardest part of the problem. They're tackling the easiest part, the sexy part, not the part that matters the most.
So how do I become one of those 6%? I mean, my question might be, why do initiatives fail? You're saying to me, I think, is that really it's this hidden knowledge, this uncodified knowledge within your knowledge workers that is the magic sauce to make it really work. Is that what the 6% do that is different than the other majority of organizations? And if so, how do I go about doing that?
Yeah, and so that is part of it. That's probably the biggest part of it. The other part, and I'll come back to that, but the other part I want to highlight is folks don't often understand what the problem space is that they're solving. I talk about this all the time. When you're talking about agentic frameworks and should I use this framework A and framework B or framework C to do this, the first thing I tell folks is those frameworks are built on an expectation around what your problem looks like. So for example, LangChain, a very popular technical framework for implementing agents, is built around this idea of graphs and flows. Everything is a workflow. Well, if your problem is a workflow problem, those align really well, right? So the challenge comes in is what if it's not a workflow problem? What if it's a workflow problem that masquerades as another problem? So one thing I like to talk about is in the technologist world, most developers are using AI tools. And so one of the things they have to deal with is legacy applications, and how do we modernize those legacy applications? Well, it sounds easy. The process sounds easy, right? I'm going to look at the code, I'm going to extract some requirements, I'm going to translate into a new technology. That's a masquerading process flow, because really what's going on in there is we have to uncover hidden knowledge that is lost to the ages, right? When somebody built that system, they're probably not even around anymore, right? This is one of the reasons that legacy app modernization is gives CIOs, heartburn, is because it takes so much effort to figure out, well, what does this system do? Why does it do it that way? And then how do we move that into a new technology stack? And AI can help us with that, but that's an archaeological expedition. That's not a process, right? I'm going to start looking at the code. I'm going to develop some assumptions and interpretations. Then I'm going to look at more of the code. And as I do that, I may need to reinterpret what I've already looked at. And so folks don't understand that because it's an archaeological process, a process-based flow does not perform well there. You have to look at a different framework. Another business example, what if I need to brainstorm around a marketing strategy for a new product or service? That's not a process flow. That's an iterative brainstorming, fanning out, exploring ideas, coming back together. That's more conversational and iterative. And so other frameworks that support that, such as AutoGen, which is now embedded in Microsoft Agent Framework, it's well suited to that. But if I have a process flow where I need to look at an email, decide where it needs to be routed and update, some CRM record, that's a process flow. Those iterative frameworks don't work well. So there's a problem space and technology alignment problem that people dismiss as well. And so understanding what you're trying to do is a huge part of that problem. So even once you solve that, now we go back to the first part, which is, hey, I now need to extract all of this codified or this information that's in people's heads and codify that into agents. And so we do that through shadowing, we do that through interviewing. You start off, it's easy, right? Everybody knows what 80% of their job is, right? They can rattle off the top of their heads, but it's getting in and saying, what if, right? Or when, or give me the craziest thing you've experienced over the last 3 years in your job, the craziest scenario. Those are the things I want to know about from an agentic perspective. The other 80%, that's easy. That's I don't want to belittle it, but that's a 15-minute conversation. It's the interesting stuff that causes things to fail. And that's where we need to that's why we need to do shattering. We need to do exploration of ideas, exploration of the past. Some respects, we're doing archaeology of the past, right? Look at those past tickets, look at those past problems, look at, your problem clients, if you will, and how they create challenges for your standardized process. Because that's where things are going to fail. And then there's a hidden thing in here that people don't often talk about. And I know we have lots of questions to get through, and I want to honor some of those questions. But a thing that almost everybody seems to forget is that agents are fallible, language models are fallible, and people are fallible, but they're fallible in different ways. And combined, you can make them each less fallible. Um, but you need to understand where that fallibility comes in. And when an LLM is given a task, it tends to be optimized for, hey, I want to complete that goal. We talk about this, the eager beaver scenario, right? I'm eager to please. I want to do this. So I'm going to keep trying and trying, and I'll try all of these different workarounds in order to accomplish a goal. The problem is when an LLM starts doing that, it's probably doing something you don't want it to do. So what do you need to do? You actually need to give it an alternate goal. And that alternate goal is, I can't do this problem. I need to escalate to a person to resolve. You need to give them an exit ramp in order for them to be successful. And I've seen too many agentic solutions out there that don't create that exit ramp. Give them another goal they can optimize for, that they can achieve, that doesn't cause them to run amok in your systems. And when it happens on your laptop, it's an annoyance, right? But when you alter a customer system of record in production, that could be catastrophic, right? So you don't want them just making things up in order to appease the goal, right? So you have to give them sort of two goals they can achieve at once. One is the business goal you want, the other is the exit ramp in case they can't achieve it.
So what I'm hearing you say is that why is there such a big gap? Why do so many organizations miss the mark in terms of moving into production and making it stick? And so I'm hearing you say, look, often we don't really clearly understand the problem. We aren't necessarily looking at a perspective where we understand the difference between something like a legacy conversion of a legacy system or building a brand new innovative new process. Maybe there's a lack of attention in terms of things like you mentioned, shadowing and interviewing and bringing in some of that hidden knowledge. These are concepts in change management that we're not unfamiliar with over the years when it comes to
Right.
technology. So, in a way, it's nothing new. But I'm really always shocked by the high percentage of organizations that miss those important building blocks that you're pointing out. Is it just because we're too much in a hurry? Is the urgency to adopt AI and get moving really forcing us into sort of clumsy or perhaps not as thoughtful processes as it should be? Why is that, and what can organizations do to turn that around in their organizational structure and approach?
Yeah, I would actually take a step back and say it is because while AI is a technology, it is a different type of technology that we haven't really encountered before. Every other piece of technology has been highly deterministic, meaning you could put together truth tables, you can put together logic flows, everything fits together, makes sense. The complexity of that is what, sort of made it hard. We're now dealing with non-deterministic systems. And if we struggle with software, by the way, whoever has created zero defect software before? Nobody. Everyone's created software with defects. That's a deterministic system, and we still have defects. Well, when you have a non-deterministic system and you're creating defects on top of that, how do you control that? How do you control something that's non-deterministic? There is a bigger emphasis or a bigger need to control behavior versus logic when it comes to working with LLMs. And that's why, even though change management principles they're not new, but failing to pay attention to them in this type of technology is very, very catastrophic to your overall outcome. And I think that's the big miss is people don't understand is in many respects, we're not just asking agents to do stuff. We're steering them, and we need to steer them within a set of lanes here that says, hey, you can make decisions and do things within these lanes, and that's going to be okay. But if you go outside of that lanes, then we've got to be able to detect it. We've got to be able to prevent it. We've got to be able to observe it. We've got to be able to correct it. All these different things. Whereas with traditional software, that's much, much easier to do. But when you start working with LLMs and agents, that's much harder to do. Then there's the fundamental nature of the technology itself. It's not just ones and zeros. I mean, I like to reduce AI most simply down to its pattern matching and pattern filtering. And so what I mean by that, AI is well optimized for finding patterns, matching those, and then filtering patterns out in order to do something else with it. And that's all forms of AI. Generative AI is really no different from that perspective. But what's unique when you think about that is LLMs are trained on very pretty much everything that could be digitized in form of communication, right? All kinds of novels, articles, audio has been transcribed into text and fed into these machines to find the hidden patterns. And when you think about it, it's pretty remarkable what they're able to do. When you look at a sentence in text, right? There's a noun, there's a verb, right? Subject, object, adverbs, adjectives, etc. This word tends to come before this one. Those are easy things to sort of pick apart, but those are only a couple of different dimensions, right? Parts of speech, precedent, antecedent. Those are just very, very simple dimensions. Every single word that is fed into these models is cataloged across 1,500, more than 1,500 different dimensions. And so when you start doing that, the patterns that it picks up on is not just language patterns, but actual communication patterns in the way humans communicate to other people. And when you look at it through that lens, it's no longer about language, but it's about how do we communicate ideas? How do we communicate expectations? How do we get you to adhere to those expectations? And so now you have to start talking to language. When you realize that, you start talking to language models like, you're a highly capable, very smart person, but you know nothing about what I'm trying to do, but you know a lot about a field. So how do I indoctrinate you into my organization, the way we talk about things, the way we approach things? Um, That is where people start to fall down on the job. It's not just go look at this email, and if it's got these types of things going on, it route it over here. You need to communicate like an intern. How do you ensure an intern is going to be able to complete a job? Sometimes you ask them to tell me, what are you going to do, right? We often refer to this as a planning step in LLM. Tell me what your plan is, and I want to review it before you execute it, right? What problems do you think you're going to encounter along the way? I want to make sure you understand the problem space that you're operating in. And so when you start providing, prompts and context that start to shape that, you start to have much better control in terms of steering agents and getting the output that you want. But people forget about that, and they don't think about this technology is actually, while it's based on language, it's really finding the hidden patterns of communication. Communication is all about behavior. We're trying to control behavior in a non-deterministic system. That's not technology. That's almost psychology, right? And that's sort of the mindset that you have to sort of approach these things if you want to be successful with them. And it's why so many people sort of fail, because they're only sort of they have a shallow understanding of what's going on with these things.
Our guest today is Joe Hours. He is the director of AI solutions at Centric Consulting, and he helps organizations move from AI experimentation to real world deployment at scale. He is an expert at identifying high impact use cases and driving the organizational change needed to make adoption stick. Now, Joe, I want to ask about the application of AI in the right places. I have heard from other guests that this can be a, a big barrier to enterprise-wide adoption, really applying it where it really makes a difference. So how do you help clients identify the right use cases where AI can actually deliver measurable business value?
Yeah, it's stupidly simple but infinitely complex. I almost refer to it like checkers in some respects, right? So I typically tell clients, start with where it hurts, start with where are you spending time, or where are you accumulating misery. Those are going to be great opportunities for how can AI make my life better. But along with that, you have to index that against what's the business value of doing this particular use case. Um, but business value isn't enough because I could have the greatest use case in the world for my business, but if organizationally I'm not ready, if technologically I'm not ready for it, then it's not really a feasible use case. So even though I can do it, it's where I'm spending time, it's where I'm accumulating money, or a misery, and it's where I'm spending money. But if I can't do it and I can't support it, I shouldn't start there. So I usually tell folks to figure out, okay, let's start with your pain points first, and then out of there, let's sort of look at business value, technological feasibility for your organization. And not only includes implementing it, but also supporting it. Because you can always hire consultants, right? You could always hire us to help you implement it. I'm a big believer that if you do that, you also need to figure out how are you going to support that going forward. You don't want to be hiring consultants, forever. So you need to have that, be able to have that supportive capability internally. And then if you implement it, you have to make sure that people are going to use it and listen to it, because if they don't adopt it, then you've wasted all of this investment in doing so. um, we're a Microsoft partner. Love Microsoft. Copilot is a very, very capable product, but people bought seats in the name of going fast. It didn't train people on how to do it. And then organizations struggle with adoption because it's like putting your great grandfather down at a computer and say, I want you to go search Google. Well, for what? Why do I want to do that? How does that impact my day-to-day life? And even if you're technologically forward and like, oh, I think, I could search for XYZ, chances are you're going to search for something that's very, very generic and you'll get very generic results back. And you'd be like, I would spend more time editing what it created for me than if I just went off and did it on my own. So I'm just going to do that. Or I'll try it 3 or 4 times and I want because I don't know how to unlock the real potential of the tool, and then I just get frustrated and I give up. So we go back to that organizational adoption piece is huge because you don't want to spend money either developing a Agentic solution or buying a solution that has AI built in it if people don't trust it and people don't want to use it. Because then they're just not going to, and you'll get no uplift from it whatsoever, right? That's the other part of the challenge that we have. But then you do have to align this with business value, feasibility, at the same time. So it's sort of a three-axis merging that you need to come to. And when you do that, you'll see use cases bubble to the top. You'll see stuff that'll be like, we need to invest to achieve these. And other ones you'll be like, this is just not for us at all
Mm.
at this point in time. And I recommend organizations reevaluate that list every 6 months because new capabilities come out, the organization develops new capabilities, new skills, more people get acquainted and acclimated to it. And so it's worth revisiting on a fairly frequent basis, far frequently than we've done any other sort of strategic planning. Because one, the field changes, so quickly. But two, as your organization grows, you're going through this accelerated growth curve here in terms of adoption and understanding. You want to be able to capitalize on that when you can. So that's how I tell organizations to start thinking about it. And through that, you go through that sort of traditional crawl, walk, run approach there. But it really starts with business value, technical feasibility, and organization adoption readiness. You get those three things aligned, you'll be off to the races.
Analyst firms like Bain, KPMG, McKinsey, they all point to research that tells us that often organizations, even once they implement an AI solution, they often miss the mark in terms of impact and ROI. And often that's because there's a lack of connective tissue between the technological initiative and the business objectives. So, what do you tell your clients about how to measure the actual impact and ROI of a solution once it's in place?
So I just start with that question right there. Before you embark on a use case, if you cannot define a KPI that you're measuring against, it's not a valid use case. It's an idea, it's a shiny object that somebody wants to pursue. What is the KPI you're trying to track, right? Are you trying to reduce how much time is spent on a given item? Are you're trying to reduce the number of hours, improve the quality? Are you trying to improve, time to market, maybe box out a competitor with something novel? There's lots of different types of business strategic objectives, but it has to be anchored and focused on what are your objectives, which does bring me, I'm just going to go down a rabbit hole here for a second. I tell executives in boardrooms all the time, AI is never your strategy. If somebody asks you to put together an AI strategy, tell them no. Tell me what your business strategy is, and I'll tell you how AI might be able to help you accelerate or achieve it. But don't flip the two. Don't make AI the strategy. Make AI the mechanism by which you can help achieve that strategy faster, better, cheaper. And so every organization has slightly different strategic objectives that they're trying to do, right? Growing in a market, you might be, spending, like crazy capital expenditure to grow your market, or you might be an established market and you want to box out startups and other folks, and how do you do that? There's lots of different things you can align to, but it has to be that strategic focus first.
Mm.
And then if you don't have the ability to measure it today, that becomes problem number two. Because just because I can articulate a KPI, if you don't measure it today, I guarantee you are not going to measure it tomorrow, because it's just too difficult to do. So pick with stuff that you can do now, or just be willing to accept the fact that this is an increase in your operational budget that may or may not pan out if you go down this road. And that's just the reality of it. I mean, I wish it were easy just to snap your fingers and have KPIs tracked, but it's not that easy for many organizations. But if you've got them, leverage them.
Our guest today is Joe Hours, Director of AI Solutions at Centric Consulting, and we're talking about what it actually takes to move from experimentation to enterprise-wide impact with AI. You can find him and find out more at centricconsulting.com. Now, Joe, can you share an example of one organization that you feel has been particularly successful and moved from experimentation to real-world impact? What changed and what made the difference?
Um, the clients that we work with, so a little bit of the secret sauce here, getting folks to understand that the problem that you're working on will shape your solution, right? We talked a little bit about that before, but it goes a little deeper than that. Um, if you are trying to implement agents as what I would call an agentic workforce, which is, hey, I got a business function, I want to replicate and scale. The common simple example is customer service. We had a specialty healthcare company that had an entire department. All they did was look at doctor's office notes, ER notes from all these disparate hospital systems, unstructured information coming in, but they would manually try and extract specialty prescription information from it. And they wanted to know if agents could help them accelerate that process. And so that was an agentic workforce problem. We were able to do that and get 98%, accuracy rate. Was 100% accuracy rate of the 98% that it could process. The other 2% got kicked out to humans, right? One of those lessons I talked about earlier for, pennies on the page of analysis. And so understanding that that was an agentic workforce problem. Now, Sally in accounting wants to use Copilot or wants to use Claude Cowork for something. That's where we start getting into this world of agentic assistance. And agentic assistance is that individual sort of one-off, that judgment-heavy work where they're analyzing, summarizing, exploring, doing stuff as a part of their day-to-day job. That does not necessarily improve with scale in terms of the economics. The economics don't necessarily improve with scale. Every task needs fresh context. Every prompt needs multiple iterations. You might have some incremental time savings, but individual productivity rarely translates into organizational productivity. Whereas if you're working on an agentic workforce type problem, those economics do scale, but they do require that you understand what process we're trying to do, what we're likely to encounter, and how we're likely to do that. So we've seen organizations do that, be very, very successful. We had a Fortune 5 company we helped put in agentic solution for, help them reduce the time to close their books from 4 days to 1 day, using agents to research items that didn't automatically reconcile, right? That's another example. We've got quite a few clients where we're doing the app modernization for where we have a unique approach to how we leverage agents to accomplish that. Knock on wood so far, right? Every consulting firm we've gone head to head against, we've beat them hands down in terms of quality, speed, and coverage of what we've done. And it's because we understand what agents can do. We understand the LLMs that power them, and how to provide the right prompt to get what you want, how to provide the right context, which is what information do you need to do your job, and how do you manage attention, which is I'm only going to give you what you need at that point in time that you need it in order to be successful. So those are some of the things that we do to help clients be successful in this space.
We have reached the action item round of the program. Joe, I'm wondering if you could please provide us with 3 quick action items that our listeners can use to take advantage of your ideas and advice.
Yeah. So the first is if you don't have a use case list, start creating that use case list and start tracking these 3 things, right? The business value tied to a strategic objective. That's easy enough for folks to start to figure out and at least talk about. Then think about the technical feasibility. Do you have the skills and capability to actually implement? Do you have the skills and capabilities to support when you have to start bringing in data? Is it clean enough that it's not going to lead an LLM or an agent astray? And then ask yourself, if we implemented this, would people pay attention to it? Would they actually trust it? If you can start answering those questions, you'll start to find more valuable use cases that you should be focusing on inside your organization to get started. Once you have selected that, when you transition into that next phase, the things that you need to start thinking about is what is the shape of the problem and how does that align to the agent framework that we're using? How are we addressing the things that we don't know, the situations that we might not know that were going to occur when we go to production? How are we going to provide agents an off-ramp? How are we going to avoid trying to even attempt to process something that we shouldn't? And start thinking about this stuff from a behavioral perspective, a disciplined execution perspective, and think about this less as a technology play. That is going to help you greatly in anything that you do in this space.
Joe, it has been great speaking with you today. We're just about out of time, but before I let you go, one last question. What should business owners and technologists be thinking about now and strategizing for today in order to be prepared for the world in 5 years' time?
Well, I'm actually going to shorten that time horizon and say to be prepared for the next 18 months. Because I think we're going to see some seismic shifts in the next 18 months in terms of the cost equation of deploying AI inside organizations. We're already seeing reports come out, frontier, firms losing 5 times as much in costs as they're bringing in revenue. That's not sustainable at this scale. Some of these companies are starting to dwarf country economies and country GDPs. It's kind of astounding how much money is sort of being lost and being subsidized in order to roll these capabilities out in the short run. So I do expect to see the cost to increase, but I don't think we're going to see the cost increase necessarily on the price sheet. For example, when Fable came out from Claude, it was only twice as much as their flagship model, Opus 4.8. Great models, right? Love them. But Fable uses more tokens. So it's not just a price per token play, it's also how many tokens do we consume? And all of a sudden, a marginal increase in your price list can lead to a ballooning sort of operational budget expense that you weren't necessarily expecting. So I think in the short run, people need to start looking at, okay, if we have a successful agentic solution in play, what's the cheapest model we can run and be successful with it? And start looking for that optimization now. I also think probably in the next 18 months, we'll see an increase of people fine-tuning their own open source models and deploying small language models in their environment to offload some of that work to help manage costs. Because I do think
Mm,
cost is going to be very, very prohibitive in the next 18 months for many organizations. We're already seeing stories, right? Uber blew through their AI budget in 4 months. Microsoft has turned off access to Claude models because of the spend inside their own organization. So we're seeing these stories come out, and this is really ungoverned use in the name of innovation, exploration, and moving on AI fast that is now having a very real impact on the bottom line. And people are having to go back 6 months after the fact and put in governance and say, oh, timeout. Are we going to manage this properly? So if you're just getting started, one or two agents solutions aren't going to break the bank. But if you're moving beyond that, you really need to make sure you've got the right governance in place from a cost management perspective. And by the way, I don't want to dismiss if you're putting something in production, you need to have full governance in place in terms of observability, security, access controls, all that type of stuff. Do not put anything in production out there, right? Software product OpenClaw went out there, and within 2 weeks, right, it blew up everywhere. But 38% of the plugins and skills are malicious. You don't want to be caught in that environment in your organization. So make sure you have governance. But
mhm.
cost management is going to be the thing in 18 months that people are going to have to pay attention to. And you have to start factoring that in now. How are you going to address it? Because if you become hooked on using agents, it's going to be difficult to roll them back out of the organization. But if it's cost prohibitive, what do you do? Right. And that's what people need to think about now before they encounter that.
That is Joe Hours, Director of AI Solutions at Centric Consulting. Joe, it's been great speaking with you today. Thank you so much for being our guest today on the Digital Transformation Podcast.
Thank you, Kevin. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.